Actress and model Brooke Shields wrote a story about my mother and me, minus, of course, the glamour and paparazzi and stardom. Well, at least that's what it felt like reading her 2014 memoir. And Terry Terrific, as Brooke referred to her in her memoir, was an alcoholic. Of course, Brooke's relationship with her mother was very complicated, and she felt that this was not always reflected in the media coverage. They didn't know the true version of Terry Terrific that Brooke knew. And she so bravely detailed this in her memoir, of which I am a fan, super fan, really recommend that you read it. I read the audiobook version, which was awesome because Brooke herself actually reads it, and you can really feel the emotion. It just amazes me how common the stories are for adult children of alcoholics. So on the surface, Brooke Shields and I have nothing in common. She traveled the world, she was dubbed America's sweetheart, she was in dozens and dozens of movies and theatrical productions and international ad campaigns. She graduated from Princeton. On the surface, we have nothing in common, but actually, both as fellow adult children of alcoholics, we actually have a ton in common. We both know very well the lifelong, complicated torture that comes with having an alcoholic mother. Our lives were both shaped by the complicated mother-daughter relationship that we had. And Brooke shares this story in a way that makes it feel like you're sitting across the table at a coffee shop with your new friend, and all the while you're listening to her story thinking, oh my gosh, that's my story. How does she know my story? So here are the 5 ways in which I think Brooke Shields poignantly, accurately told the story of the ACOA life. 1, all Brooke ever wanted was for her mother to be happy. So even when she was busy with school or a film or whatever the project was that she had, she was always distracted by and thinking about her mother's state, her mother's condition, how her mother was doing. Brooke described how she was looking at photos of her mother that were taken in her young adult days, and how she thought about how happy she looked and how she wished that she could have made her mother as happy as she looked in those photos. And this is described throughout the entire memoir, Brooke thinking about and wanting to so desperately take away the sadness and everything that pushed Terry Terrific to drink. This even goes all the way up to the end when Terry is in hospice care and Brooke really wants to see her mother in peace and to have serenity, and how disappointed she is when she believes that her mother still looks very unhappy and not at peace, and how even when Brooke tries to ungrip her hands that she's holding so tightly together so that she could hold her mother's hand, Terry won't let her. The grip is too strong. She had that figurative wall put up even till the very end. 2, Brooke felt completely responsible for Terry's life and her drinking. So even though Terry was Brooke's manager of her young career, Brooke was often switching roles and in a mother role, which is very common that we often talk about as adult children of alcoholics. And as Terry's alcoholism worsened over the years, Brooke did everything that she could to try to fix her. So just like me and maybe you, Brooke wrote heartfelt letters. She talked to her through tears. She gave her the cold shoulder as like punishment. She organized an intervention. She did everything that she could possibly think to do to help her mother get help and find sobriety. But in the end, none of it was successful. Mom would not stop drinking, Brooke wrote. I could only believe I wasn't doing enough to make her stop. It took me 30 years to realize that nothing I did could make her stop. She did not want to, nor did she ever stop by herself. At the time, I thought I could still fix things. Helpless codependency. 3, Brooke was a perfectionist and constantly sought her mother's approval. So she describes that often on set, she wasn't nervous unless her mother was watching. And it was all so confusing for her because in some moments, Terry was showering her with copious amounts of love and affection and adoration. Yet when she was in drunken rants, she said terribly hurtful, cruel things. So, like me, Brooke immersed herself in work. She thought if she could just focus on that and getting better and better, she didn't have to pay attention to her mother's worsening alcoholism. And she describes how on some filming sets, she developed some OCD habits. And this was kind of just laughed off as actor superstition, not wanting to affect the production or her acting. But I know as an ACOA with some OCD traits that that was most likely tied to her mother's alcoholism. She wrote that there was safety in the accountability of her job, that could be a distraction from what was going on at home. And 4, the most difficult thing that Brooke experienced in life was her mother's alcoholism and the effects of it. So imagine being a celebrity. I think it's a lot more challenging than people really think about. Actors, for example, work 12 to 15 hours a day, often in extreme conditions when they're trying to finish a film on a tight deadline. They have all that memorization, and then of course they're under the microscope of the public through the media. They're either loved or hated, and there really isn't any in between. So I would imagine a celebrity like Brooke would have a ton of challenges in her career to think about over the course of her life, yet she says hands down her mother's alcoholism, specifically the hope that she held on to her whole life that her mother would get help and find sobriety, was the most challenging part of her whole life. She wrote that fame was fake and fickle, but her mother's alcoholism was real and consistent. And then there are the stories that are all too reminiscent of stories of my life and perhaps yours, of the way that her mother's drinking affected major milestones or events. And while that constant worry lessened as Brooke got older and had her own family and children, it was still always there. And 5, Brooke's relationship with her mother was extremely complicated. So before I purchased Brooke's memoir, I read all of the reviews, and I could tell with probably pretty good accuracy which ones had been written by adult children of alcoholics or anyone who had ever experienced addiction in their family or with a loved one, and those that had not been. So the negative ones wrote that they were confused by the conflicted feelings that Brooke had. Did she love and forgive her mother, or was she angry and hurt and resentful about her mother? Because they felt like Brooke was going back and forth throughout the memoir. And if someone were to ask me that question about my own mother and my relationship with her, I would say, yes, I feel all of those things, all of the above. Because being an adult child of an alcoholic or loving anyone with addiction is so complicated, and those conflicted feelings are just part of it. I guess people kind of crave simplicity in stories, but there's really nothing simple about adult children of alcoholics or loving someone with addiction. So I think Brooke did a fantastic job in really accurately telling the story of the ACOA life. Those conflicting feelings will always envelope the relationship that I have with my mother. So in her 20s, Brooke realized that she had a need to have her own manager, a new manager, and to start directing her career in a new direction and to really focus on taking good care of herself. So she was very nervous about having this conversation with her mother, who was still acting as her manager. So she went to her and told her personally, and all the while she was talking to her mother, she just wanted to take all of her words back and just let it be how it always had been, her mother calling the shots and being her manager. But she knew that even though it felt so wrong, it was the right thing to do for her and for her career, and likely her mother. So we have so many people in media, in social media, to envy. They seem to have it all. There's such glamour and excitement. But I thought this memoir was a great reminder that there's a lot that isn't captured by a camera. And you could be living almost the same life at home, inside, behind closed doors, not captured by the camera, as someone who seems to have an amazing, perfect life. We are so not alone. And I really reflected on this memoir, thinking about how if Brooke were growing up today, if she were a child star today, the way that she was back in the 70s and 80s, how would her life have been different? And certainly with all of the education in hand, with addiction, and with more people empowering her through sharing their stories, she might have earlier recognized that she couldn't control her mother's drinking, that she had nothing to do with, nor could she help her mother get help. And maybe she would have taken control of her career and her life earlier on. But I concluded in the end, this complicated mother-daughter relationship would always be complicated and conflicted. Because when you love someone and you know the true human being they are, and then you see what addiction does to them, it's extraordinarily painful and confusing and conflicting. That's the thing. Addiction takes seemingly the most wonderful people. They're funny and intelligent and kind and sweet, and we see all of that in that human being. We love them. And then we see what they become under the influence, or what they become as a result of addiction's strong hold on them. And it's horribly painful. And that makes it so complicated and conflicted. And we have to do a hard thing. We have to accept when our alcoholic or addicted loved one won't accept help, when they don't want help. And we have to accept that all we can do is appreciate the true human being that is underneath all of that. I hope you are so well in your journey today. Thank you, Brooke.